When we think of Alaska, we are all on a journey together. An Odyssean voyage of outward adventure and inner reflection, reaching toward the world's edge, to that shadowy sea where the sun is hidden and the clouds are born. Where the Earth's subterranean heart beats. Where living creatures flow like clouds from age to age. Where the land sets the terms and humankind conforms. And so to the Alaska Peninsula we come, seeking the limits of the known world at the ends of the earth. A narrow frontier between warm and cold latitudes extends 500 miles from the Alaskan mainland, separating the tempestuous Bering Sea from the Pacific. A cloud-cloaked landscape, the Alaska Peninsula is accessible only by air or water. The mostly treeless peninsula endures a maritime climate described as notoriously miserable. Long winters, cool summers, frequent storms, and sudden bursts of wind called willowads. So fierce, bush pilots say, they can rip the numbers off a plane. On the Bering Sea, the Bristol Bay lowlands are nesting grounds for myriad bird species. The Arctic tern is the longest-range migrant in the world. The sun-loving tern sees daylight more than any other animal, experiencing 2 summers per year. One in Alaska, the other in Antarctica, 10,000 miles distant. The Aleutian Range, part of the Ring of Fire, comprises the spine of the peninsula, with 20 active volcanoes rising above the glacier-carved fjords of the Pacific coast. Near the base of the Alaska Peninsula, a national park stretches from the Bristol Bay lowlands across to the Shelikof Strait. Lightly visited and little known outside Alaska, Katmai is larger than Yellowstone and Yosemite combined. This is the volcanic heartland of the Aleutian Range. In June 1912, a cataclysmic explosion sent a cloud of ash 20 miles into the sky. Darkness fell on the Alaska Peninsula for 3 days. Bears were blinded by falling ash and starved to death. Plants and small animals were smothered. Birds coated by ash fell to the ground and died. The salmon run was wiped out for 5 years. Even the region's prolific mosquitoes were exterminated. Within a few days, acid rain disintegrated clothes hanging out to dry in Vancouver. Soon after, the ash cloud passed over Virginia. 10 days later, the veil of dust reached the skies over the Mediterranean. Such a massive eruption naturally attracted the attention of scientists. A century later, the ash-covered valley floor has cooled, and the 10,000 smokes have vanished. But the magma chamber still lies unquietly beneath the cluster of Katmai volcanoes. The face of our solid Earth, seemingly so stable, so inert, and so finished, is still in flux, still evolving. Plato wrote that the lost island of Atlantis disappeared in a great cataclysm, a volcanic caldera that sank into the sea, causing the collapse of a civilization. What will our place be? What will be the fate of our civilization in this transforming world, where the earth beneath our feet can tremble and erupt? Oncorhynchus nerca, the Sockeye salmon, is a creature ruled by instinct rather than memory, and its instinct is to kill itself. Sockeye salmon are anadromous, hatching in fresh water but spending most of their lives in the salty sea. Most eggs never hatch. Heat and drought kill them. Predators eat them, sedimentation cloaks them. The current pulls some eggs away. Of the 10% that hatch, only 10% of those fish ever make it to the sea. Birds feed on them, as do other fish. Some even starve. After 3 or 4 years in the ocean, preyed upon by seals, sea lions, orcas, and salmon sharks, only 10% survive to return to the streams whence they came. These fish display an astonishing homing instinct, using magnetic navigation to return from the sea in the world's largest sockeye salmon run, to Bristol Bay, where predators await. Once in the river, the salmon that escaped the gauntlet use olfactory navigation to find the very stream, even the very gravel bar where they hatched. During this intense drive to spawn, they begin fasting. For energy, they turn inward and start to consume their own flesh. Even their scales are absorbed into the skin. Against all odds, some sockeye survive, only to obey the evolutionary imperative to return to their natal streams to spawn and die, bringing nutrients from the open ocean to the Alaskan landscape. Even the trees near the river contain traces of salmon DNA. We too came from the water. It was there the cells formed the calcium habit, and they kept it after we came ashore. As the salmon return from the sea, so too are we saline. When we evolved, we brought the sea on shore with us, in our cells, in our blood, the very miniature of the all-embracing ocean. In many a fin and mammalian foot, we can see our natural history passing by, some part of ourselves that lies unrealized in the momentary shape we inhabit. In spring, the bears leave their deep snow dens in the high country in search of food to replace the loss of 1/3 of their body weight. More than 2,000 brown bears live in Katmai National Park. An estimated 10,000 populate the peninsula, making them more numerous than people. These are coastal brown bears, the largest predatory land mammal that yet roams the earth. Brown bears are larger than interior grizzlies, the same species, because of the abundance of food sources near the coast. The big bears use threat displays and signals to avoid fights and establish dominance, like a peculiar vocalizing known as jaw-popping, and an exaggerated swagger called cowboy walking. Though much of their diet is vegetarian, the great concentration of giant bears on the peninsula is due to one food source. The bears are so focused on the abundance of salmon that they tolerate close proximity. Even ours. The falls in the river are a barrier, forcing the salmon to pause in their migration. But that does not mean catching them is easy. This unusual concentration of brown bears allows observers to witness the full range of their behavior.
Got it on video. What is that?
Oh no.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
Hard realities can intrude.
Oh my gosh.
Dominant males will sometimes prey on cubs.
That's terrible.
Despite the attentive care of sows, only 1 out of 3 cubs will survive their first year. The Pacific side of the peninsula is a zone of geological violence where tectonic plates drive mountains up and glaciers grind down to the coast. The horned puffin flies better than it walks and swims more gracefully than it flies. They spend most of their lives on the open ocean, coming into land only to mate and nest. On these shores there are echoes of past and future, of the flow of time, diminishing yet encompassing all that has gone before, of the sea's eternal rhythms, the running tides, the rush of surf, the pressing rivers of the currents, shaping, changing, dominating, of the stream of life, flowing as inexorably as any ocean current from distant past to unknown future. Farther down the peninsula, a giant caldera emerges from the horizon, an ancient stratovolcano that exploded 3,500 years ago and then collapsed upon itself. It is so remote that more people climb Everest in a year than visit Aniakchak. In 1931, a volcano inside the volcano erupted, attracting the attention of the glacier priest, a Jesuit geologist named Bernard Hubbard. Hubbard described what he saw in apocalyptic terms: a valley of death in which not a blade of grass or a flower or a bunch of moss broke through the thick covering of deposited ash. The caldera itself was the prelude to hell: black walls, black floor, black water, deep black pit.
Off on the first attempt to land inside a volcano, and the world's largest volcano at that. The first sight of Aniakchak takes your breath away. It is too big to comprehend in a few moments. Like a moth singeing its wings in the world's largest candle, our tiny plane is lost in this new world inside an erupted volcano. Imagine coming upon a scene of destruction where bombs thrown out by the eruption made this vast plane inside the crater look like a war-torn battlefield where high projectiles had landed and exploded. But after all, Aniakchak crater is the biggest cannon in the world. It snows and it blows in Aniakchak. Whatever is latest is on top. This time it's tons of ashes. Walking on these ashes was like trying to walk on a pile of sliding wheat. We were tiny pygmies exploring a world unreal. Mineral springs bubbled from the crater floor. The active parts of the crater were most impressive. Lava oozing out of the floor and walls sent gas and steam into the air. To get near was playing with fire, but we were out to explore anything Aniakchak had to offer. If Virgil, Homer, and Dante had seen anything like this, they really would have had something to write about. We began the day, as was our custom, with a sacrifice of the Mass in our volcanic sanctuary of the wilderness, where the candles on the high altar were stately columns of ascending smoke. The first time we saw this prelude of hell, we determined to descend to its fiery bottom. Down in this erupting chaos, precious scientific data could be obtained, and we wanted it. As we stood on the brink, our courage weakened, our 0 hour. Steam and poisonous gases, seething and crackling below, with the fires of hell rumbling underneath. A ring of erupting violence encircling a big stove lid of lava in the center. At any moment now, Aniakchak might blow up in another of its terrific eruptions and blow us to eternity. Back to our work. We want to know how hot it is. We put copper discs on the end of our ice sticks. They melt at over 2,000 degrees, the highest temperature ever recorded in the bottom of an Alaskan volcano, our real scientific victory. The heat is terrific, but we continue our work in spite of it. In those few short hours, we live interminable years in an earthly hell. The uncertainty of it all gets on our nerves. Fresh clouds of smoke and steam bursting out with terrific violence fill us with apprehension. But we couldn't help having a feeling of exultation. The innermost secrets of Aniakchak, the world's largest volcanic crater, were ours.
On the desolate caldera floor, a genesis unfolds. Lichens, algae, fungi, and mosses knit together to form a cryptobiotic crust, a thin layer of life, building soil and holding moisture for subsequent plants to succeed. The walls of Aniakchak even influence the weather, transforming the miserable to the marvelous. Clouds moving in from Bristol Bay are captured and spill over the rim of the caldera, creating a phenomenon called cloud Niagaras. The Aniakchak River exits the caldera through a breach in the walls called the Gates. A crater lake once burst through and drained the equivalent of the entire Mississippi River in only 6 hours. Today's river has a steep gradient in its short run to the Pacific, dropping 1,000 feet in only 15 miles. For adventurous paddlers, it is fast, cold, and dangerously remote. In the fall, when the salmon runs end, bears gather to forage for salmon carcasses. Less nutritious, but still a food source. On the coast, the bears return to their more solitary existence. Humankind has been a part of this landscape for more than 9,000 years. Where the anthroposphere is concerned, nature is not as natural as it looks. Even this distant land has felt the touch of industrial society. Lingering oil from the Exxon Valdez can still be found in the beaches of the Katmai coast, more than 450 miles away from the 1989 spill. Dissolved fallout from burned fossil fuels is preserved in glaciers, which are flushing into the ocean in a colossal meltdown. Climate change is accelerating. Alaska and the Arctic are warming far faster than the rest of the world. The camera's eye can beguile us into imagining that any human impacts would be insignificant on so massive a landscape and on such magnificent wildlife. But what effect will the dramatic climate transformations have on the salmon run, on the bears, on us? The limits of the known world are veiled, but we are not at the ends of the earth. Nature is still busy with experiments. We see but dimly when we contemplate the wilderness of Katmai and the Alaska Peninsula. There is a wilderness for each of us, should we decide to seek it. The journey through it is filled with complexity, ambiguity, and delight. The magic that gleams an instant between us and the wild things is both the recognition of diversity and the need for connection across the illusions of form. It is nature's cry to far-wandering, insatiable humankind. Do not forget your brethren, nor the green woods and grasslands whence you sprang. The hope of life is that new things come, new senses try the unfamiliar air. We are only one of many appearances of life. We are not its perfect image, for it has no image except life itself. And life is exuberant and emergent in the stream of time.